This week, the pursuit of creativity brought me to etiquette expert Thomas Farley, also known as Mr. Manners. In addition to being a keynote speaker, workshop leader, and TV commentator, Thomas is on a mission to answer the public's modern manner questions. Think less what fork do I use and more how much do you give for a wedding present. In this episode, we talk about the importance of pivoting within your own industry, the power of surrounding yourself with like-minded friends, and cover tons of these modern etiquette questions that you can definitely relate to. My name is Ikey Ajavon, and welcome to the Pursuit of Creativity podcast. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Ikey, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
I'm really excited to have this conversation. Last time we met, we were hanging off the side of a building. The first time we met, we were hanging off the side of a building at a press event. So we didn't get a whole ton of time to talk, but I'm excited to kind of jump in and learn more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a pretty death-defying, adrenaline-inducing event. So hopefully our podcast conversation can happen in a little bit more of a sedate setting than the last time we were together.
Yeah, a little less adrenaline, a little less, fear, a little less stuff, but I'm excited for it. So to kick things off, can you just let us know where you're based, where you're located, and your full name?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Thomas Farley, known in the media as Mr. Manners, and I am born and raised in the Northeast. Went to school in New York City, which is the city that I call home. So I live in Manhattan. So I'm a proud New Yorker.
I love that. New York. I mean, I'm a New Yorker as well. I grew up upstate, so I'm a New York City transplant, but I love it here. And it's cool to keep meeting people from the area and seeing how they've stuck around and, are building their career in this area.
Yeah, just going to say, I think for what I do and for what you do, being in New York, being that it's the media capital of the universe, and being that it's just constantly got an influx of new and interesting, fascinating people, I find that I give a lot of energy to the city, but I derive triple when I put in. So this is a great place to be as any kind of content creator, I believe.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. People ask me what's so great? I'm like, it's hard to describe, but the energy, the people, it's just all there. Once you're here and you're doing creative stuff, it's very easy to feed off that energy in the best possible way.
Totally.
So let's shift gears. I'd love to hear about your background. So you mentioned the media, the world calls you Mr. Manners, and I want to get to that name a little bit down the line, but let's back up. Let's hear some of the job history leading up to where you're at now.
Sure. So when I was young, when I was a grade school student, it was my dream to be a TV reporter. And I've got all these book reports. I was actually just with my mom over the weekend, visiting for the long weekend, and going through some of the childhood book reports that I wrote. And it was always, there I am, on the scene as a little second grader. This is Tommy Farley reporting live from the scene of the such and such. So television and telling stories was always really a big part of my dreams when I was a young child, and went to Fordham in New York and started out as a communications major and ultimately switched over to political science. I found that it was something about poli-sci that was really engrossing for me, and I loved it. But as I graduated, I kind of had multiple things that I was interested in, and I found myself working in an area that I had not specifically studied, which was magazine publishing. And I loved it, Ikey. There's something about creating a physical product at the end of every month that you could hold in your hand and flip through and give as a gift, or see at a newsstand, or be at the barber and see somebody reading a story that you wrote, not on a phone, but actually in their hands, was really an exciting thing. So I really burnished my credentials working in the world of magazines. And it wasn't until I ultimately landed a job as a senior editor for Town & Country magazine. And talk about a position that afforded me, I felt like the world was my oyster. I traveled to Antarctica to do a story on the journey to the last continent. I drove an Aston Martin in the south of France. I interviewed so many celebrities for cover stories. It was a great gig. But as I was gradually looking more and more at what was happening to the publishing world and the folks around me who had kind of spent a lot of time, far more time than I had, in the industry, it was definitely changing. And with the booming of social media and online video on demand, podcasts, it was becoming clearer and clearer that to spend the balance of my career working in magazine publishing might be a mistake, because it was an industry that, much as I loved it, it was disappearing before my eyes. So I had to really think, well, what do I do? How do I take all the skills that I've polished and worked on, and the credentials I've built, the contacts I've made being in the world of publishing? So I knew writers, I knew artists, I knew TV folks a bit, I knew book publishing folks. How do I take all those contacts and my love of crafting narrative and take it to the next level? So one of the things that I was responsible for while I was at Town and Country magazine was a column called Social Graces. And Ikey, it was such a fun column because it looked at just kind of quirky etiquette issues that affect all of us on an everyday basis. So when people think about etiquette, they think, oh gosh, you're talking about what fork do I use and how do I manage my knife properly without looking like I don't know table manners. And yes, that is definitely a slice of what etiquette is all about. But the far more relevant areas, I feel, are things like elevator etiquette, who gets off first, the things that we really deal with every day. So that's what the column dealt with. So every month we would look at a different issue of contemporary etiquette and behavior. And ultimately the column became so popular that we created a book called Modern Matters. And so it was an anthology. I edited it. My photo was on the book. And as soon as the book hit the newsstands, television stations started calling and saying, could we get Thomas Farley on? We love this concept of etiquette that's not fussy, it's not old-fashioned, it's not cranky, it's not judgy. It's relevant to everyday issues. And so the media started calling, and it was great for me. Like, my dreams as a second grader of being on TV were all of a sudden being realized when I kind of far put that in the rearview mirror. I thought, well, I made my bed with magazine publishing, and that's where I'll be for the balance of my career. Suddenly all these TV opportunities were arising. So it was such a thrill and remains a thrill. So that's where it began. And, it was really, when you start out, you're invited to be on a local affiliate on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. And, when you prove that you can actually handle that, then suddenly it's Sunday morning at 8 a.m. And then it's, Monday at 9 a.m. And little by little, I really started to get to be known by a national audience. And I know we'll talk about this more. I just consider it such a privilege to be able to get this message out in a really meaningful way. And I think what's going on in our culture right now makes the sort of conversations that I do have in my role as Mr. Manners supremely important.
Totally. Wow. That is such a cool backstory. I love that it went from relatively very traditional to writing a book. And then now you're doing this, you're spreading your message on social media, you're on all these news segments. I love that it went through this evolution and back to your original goal as a kid. So that is really, really awesome. I love to hear it. And my next question for you, I have a lot of questions based on all of those things, but first and foremost, so just to bring the audience up to speed, what are some more of these modern manners that people can expect? I like what you're saying. That's more of the things that it's more everyday. Because I remember in my business class, we had a business etiquette class, but just a standard business class. And one of the things was how do you eat at a business dinner? Literally what you're saying, what fork and whatever. So what are some of the more modern ones that are more applicable to, I think, the everyday person?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I've got to tell you, so New York Magazine, you and I both New Yorkers, as we've discussed, New York Magazine just a couple of weeks ago did a big cover story on the new etiquette and the rules that we need to be abiding by in 2023, not even 2021 or 22, but 2023, the things that we need to know. And this magazine cover story got so much coverage. I was not any part of the story, but given what I do, I was invited to commentate and offer my thoughts on it. I have to tell you, I disagreed with about half of the etiquette that they offered in this story. They brought up some great issues, but their takes on it, I thought some of them were just way off base. But it covered things such as ghosting a first date. So if you have a first date and it goes really badly, do you need to be in regular contact or follow-up contact, or you just ghost the first date? It talked about how you properly split a check when you're out with a group of friends. Should you be all paying the same amount? If someone drank a little bit more, the other person only got an appetizer, what's the etiquette of that? It talked about this real trends that we're seeing, and I've been talking about this a lot in my segments, of what is known as both tipflation and tip creep. So this idea that everywhere we go in our everyday lives, every time we get a coffee, a muffin, you name it, we're being asked, would you like to tip 20, 25, 30%? So these issues are really kind of, they've been thrust on us. We've just come out of a pandemic. We've now got the pandemic officially ending in May from a government standpoint, as far as the age that we're living in. And I think for a lot of people most of us, who spent several years kind of clustered inside with our little bubble, now are out and about, and the technology has marched on, and our etiquette needs to adapt to the changing mores that we're seeing, whether it's how we interact with our friends, how we interact with our romantic partners, or how we interact with members of the public or those in hospitality. And so etiquette is always on the ready, which is what I love about it. It's always on the ready to step up to the challenge of giving us a set of guidelines, a set of recommendations that we can live by. And that's really the heart of good etiquette. It's not about making people feel inferior. It's not about making people feel like, oh, shoot, I don't know the rules and now I feel stupid. Far from it. The idea of etiquette is that it's adaptable. So the etiquette of 100 years ago, guess what? It's not the etiquette of today. And that's a good thing. Cultures adapt, societies adapt, and so does etiquette. So that basically, as long as we have a similar common playbook, a commonly accepted guideline of what is good behavior, and we all are familiar with it, that allows society to flourish and to function in a way we're not inadvertently offending anyone or using bad etiquette without knowing it.
Totally. And I think I can definitely, I felt that when I was when things started opening up in New York, I was like, wait, how do I act again? Like, what do I do? What's acceptable? So I love the idea of that there being some base level or relatively agreed upon rules. So everyone can be like, okay, I feel pretty good about this. If there's something special, obviously for different people, from different cultures or different places, that's different. But as long as we have a good baseline, I feel like everyone can enjoy that and agree on that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about even going to a wedding, maybe, I don't know when the first time you went to a wedding was, but you were probably fairly young, maybe you were 10, 11 years old. These are situations that don't happen every day. And yet there are guidelines for what to give, how much to give, how long to stay, when to RSVP. All of these things, if we generally follow these guidelines, it allows the interactions to happen that much more smoothly. And the important thing there, once we get, if you think about etiquette as the business side of any interaction, once you get the business side out of the way, when should you RSVP, how much do you give? Then you can really focus on the enjoyment and the being present and not worrying, oh, did I do the wrong thing? Because in fact, if you're familiar with the commonly accepted guidelines of etiquette, then you most certainly have done the right thing. And now you can just enjoy yourself.
That's so true. I've had many conversations where I'll look over to my partner. I'm like, how much is this enough for the gift? Is this not enough? I'm texting my sister. I'm like, how do you do it? You're a little older than it's so true. I feel like that would be such a weight off the shoulders to get that information. And I'm sure it's cool that you are you've crafted this area in society where you get to help people in that way. So let's get to the name, Mr. Manners. Is it a self-appointed name? Was it something that came from the book? Was it something that people just started calling you? I'd love to hear the story.
Sure. Yeah. So I wish I had some phenomenal story for it. And I wish also I could truly pinpoint it, but there's something that started happening little by little, as I mentioned. So I was still at Town & Country, going out, doing all this TV. And at that point, I was Thomas Farley, senior editor, Town & Country. When I left the magazine, I really, frankly, I thought that having that credential affiliated with my name no longer. So no longer was I at the magazine. But that really might mean the end of having this platform. And I was sad about that, the prospect of it. But in fact, what happened was completely the opposite. When I no longer had the affiliation with the magazine, I found myself to be even in more demands than ever. And that's when the big TV invitations started happening. I think it really began, someone or a few people just started to say, wow, you're a regular Mr. Manners, aren't you? And I just, as I was thinking about that title, it seemed kind of whimsical. It was fun. I will tell you though, before I officially adopted it, I gave it a lot of thought because, well, for two reasons. Number one, you call yourself Mr. Manners and boy, oh boy, your behavior better be pitch perfect in every single interaction. You are not allowed to be cranky or mean or sad or grumpy ever in public or with your family and friends who really hold you accountable. Okay, Mr. Manners, right? Well, that wasn't very mannerly, Mr. Manners. And I am the first to say, I, like all of us, I'm a work in progress. I do not consider myself perfect, and I don't judge. I really don't. If somebody comes to me and they want advice and they're looking for insights, and it's something that I've either gathered historically or through my experience, and I do, maybe we'll talk about this as well. I do programs and keynotes at conferences around the country. So I'm constantly hearing from individuals who are just regular everyday folks about what bothers them, what they feel etiquette issues should be focused on. So I use all of that data, that anecdotal research that I'm doing all the year through in my TV segments. But so I was worried though, as I mentioned at the outset, calling yourself Mr. Manners, that's a really high bar. But then the second thing that concerned me a bit was it also could potentially make you seem like you're someone who's just really fussy and crusty and judgy.
Yeah.
Well, like some guy who, he wears bow ties and funny little glasses. And, like I didn't ever want the etiquette to become a caricature. Although I do actually have, I think you've seen it, Ikey. I do have a caricature that I use in all of my branding. But when you see it, you realize, okay, this is not like your grandma's etiquette. This is not something that's crusty and fussy. So it was some deliberating that I did at the time to say, okay, it's cute. People get it right away.
Yeah.
But could there be a backlash to using this? But it's worked out really, really well. I would say the worst thing that ever happens if anybody ever knows in advance that I'm going to be at a dinner party, for example, often people will say, I don't know if I want to sit next to him because they're worried. They're worried about their dining etiquette, which of course I'm not. I might be observing it, but I am definitely not judging it. So, and I put people to ease right away. If they thought about that and had that fear in advance, once they meet me, that usually fades away very quickly.
Yeah, totally. Those concerns I feel like are super valid. I was like, when I first saw it on your Instagram, I was like, oh, this is amazing branding. This is spot on. I love that. But yeah, I love the taking a look at and examining how this could affect you in many different aspects. I feel like for a lot of people that have like a persona or a name attached to them, it can, to your point, put them in a bad position depending on what happens in the future. But it sounds like you've done the research and it's working very well for you so far. So why don't we circle back to our time on the side of a building really quickly, because that was a really cool press event for a new show called Limitless. And I was there for the job I work, and you as Mr. Manners and plenty of other reporters and article writers and things like that. So I would love to hear if you could share a couple other experiences of like cool press events you've got to go to as Mr. Manners.
Sure. Wow. So there have been a bunch. Something that I don't know if you know about my career background, and we haven't even touched on it in this conversation. Shortly after I left the magazine, shortly after I left Town and Country, I was really interested in the power of video and the immediacy of video. And so I created an online streaming TV network called New York Insider TV. And it was basically, it was like Entertainment Tonight for New York City. And I would go out a couple times a week and I'd be on the red carpet interview, and I interviewed celebrities, but when you're doing a cover story of a celebrity for a magazine, you're usually in a restaurant and you're having a meal, or like I interviewed Pierce Brosnan, for example, at his home in Malibu, and sat down and we had lunch and looked at the beach, and so there are a lot of kind of environmental things that you can bring into your narrative when you're having that type of experience for a magazine feature. A red carpet interview obviously is a completely different animal. It's fast and furious. You are there, you're immersed in the situation, and as a reporter, you're often asked to be on the carpet a couple of hours before the event actually starts, and you are crowded like anything. They give you an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. That's the amount of space your body can occupy, and then you're kind of there with your microphone during your interviews, trying to get people, celebrities, to come over to talk to you who may or may not know who you are. So in that role, though, I did a ton of fun events, and met so many fun celebrities, and really just loved that whole experience of being like from the Time 100 Awards, for example, to an event where John Bon Jovi was being honored, the food bank for New York City. So some really cool events where I was covering press events like the type that you and I were on at the Edge, and live for the show Limitless. As I mentioned before, I drove an Aston Martin in a DB9 in the south of France. When
that's cool.
It was just being unveiled. I've actually driven, speaking of driving, I've driven the Bugatti Veyron, which is a car that costs just about, and I think now it does, or over $1 million, this car.
Wild.
And I tell you, if you ever wanted to feel like you were just panicked about, I was worried if I put the blinking, the directional signal on, that I was going to break something. I didn't want to, bill from Bugatti after my drive. And I think the day I drove it, it was a driving rainstorm. So that enhanced the fear.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh, this baby may be capable of 300 miles an hour, but better keep it to 30. So there were probably Honda Civics that were passing me on the road. I was in this amazing sports car, but that was pretty intense. Going to Antarctica was absolutely just an extraordinary experience. It's a 2-day sea crossing from the tip of South America, a city called, a little tiny city actually called Ushuaia in Chile. From there over the Drake Passage, which is where the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans converge, which means it's the rockiest sea crossing anywhere in the world.
Right.
So, and it's 2 days to get to Antarctica from once you leave South America. So, but getting there and mixing and mingling with penguins and walruses and seals. I love to travel. I've had the opportunity. I think one thing I really, really just cherish and never take for granted is that as someone who is a writer, as someone who is a journalist in many facets of what I do a column for the Today Show, for example. There's really no person that you can't pick up the phone and call. There's no email that you can't send out requesting an interview. And if you were doing anything else, people would think, who is this wacko? Why is this person calling me? But as a journalist, as a writer, you have carte blanche to reach out to some of the most fascinating people and help tell their story and have them help you tell a larger narrative. So I feel really fortunate, and I know you do too, just this ability to kind of collaborate with and work with anyone who you so choose as a means of telling a story. So some great stories completed, some great stories still to tell.
Yeah. No, that is amazing. That's a really good point. I love the expression of gratitude and excitement about being able to talk to these amazing and brilliant people. Like you said, I feel the same way, that I get to do this kind of stuff in my job too, with these people in their selective fields and stuff. But that is really cool to hear that there's all these opportunities for people that, as a reporter and a journalist and things like that's out there. But I want to also touch on, because that's the more extravagant, exciting side of things, but there's obviously more to that, right? There's a whole other side to it. So could you walk us through, and you alluded to this a little earlier about the different things you have going on, speaking engagements and seminars and things like that. Could you talk to us about some of the other things behind Mr. Manners? So like you said, you had a column, you do these speaking engagements. Give us a look behind the curtain, all the things.
Sure. Thank you. And those are equally exciting. They're just not always as public facing. So, and what I love about what you're doing with this podcast is really kind of showing the way others have, the paths they have taken as a means of shining a light for others who might be interested in doing a similar thing on their journey. So I think something that your listeners might, I hope, will find of great interest was, so there I had left town and country. I was suddenly being asked on every TV show going. I mean, it was just a dream, and again, remains a dream of dreams to have that platform, both because I love TV, love the news media, but being able to reach an audience literally of millions was very exciting. But I had a really interesting challenge, and that was when you're asked to be, you're not a full-time staff member at any of these shows. You're asked on as a guest. You're asked on as a commentator. You typically, and with very few exceptions, you're not being paid. You're being invited on with the kind of the quid pro quo being, well, we're giving you airtime, you're getting publicity, and you're giving us your insights and your time. And although a segment that I might do only is 3 minutes or 4 minutes, the amount of work that goes into those little 3-minute segments, you're dealing with a producer and coming up with talking points. This happens sometimes over weeks leading up to those 3 minutes that you wind up getting in a TV segment. So it is quite a lot of work, and you're not being compensated. If I were someone who was out there selling bow ties or selling, skin creams or something like that as part of my segments, it would really be genuine publicity for what I'm doing that you would think would lead to increased business as a result of the exposure I was getting. In the case of the TV rollout that I had early on, I was out there, I was on TV, and the TV really had nothing that it could promote other than me as someone who could talk about these things. I literally wasn't selling anything. I had no business. This really wasn't anything that I even thought was a business. I thought, well, this is terrific. I love this platform that I have, but that was pretty much the end of it. I ultimately thought, this is nuts. I have a challenge that most businesses would be aching to have, which is more publicity than you know what to do with. How do I take all this publicity that I get and do something that is in alignment with my brand and in alignment with Mr. Manners, but that it can also allow me to make a living, as it was becoming a bigger and bigger part of my time. And so ultimately I thought, there is a need for this. And this is what I was hearing about anybody I would meet at a party and at events, at a convention. They say, gosh, what you do is so important. Can you teach my team how to do that? Can you teach my sales staff how to do that? And the more I started hearing that, I thought, I never really considered it. People had often told me you'd be a good teacher. Maybe I should think about this. So I started it was like 8 or 10 years ago. I started offering primarily to law firms and banks who have summer programs where they have their summer interns. And I would do courses on professionalism. I would do like the course that you took on dining etiquette. I would do those courses and suddenly realized, wow, there's a huge demand and a huge need for this. That being said, I also realized this is not the core. This is not all I can do. I'm so much about communication. I'm so much about being the best version of yourself. I don't want to be known as that guy who does the plate course. I really wanted to be known for something bigger and, to me, far more broad reaching. And so that is what I do now, Ikey. So my programs, which I have about 40 different programs that I teach on. I have keynote speeches that I instruct and deliver at conferences. So I travel around the globe and primarily North America, doing programs for teams big and small. Sometimes it's a team of 6 or 10 people. Sometimes it's a team of 30 or 40. And what's really exciting there is I have worked with, no exaggeration, literally from coal miners in West Virginia to Native American Indians in Washington State, to Disney executives in Burbank, and everything in between. I've toured like the plant of a perfume factory where they filled a perfume in the bottles and been there to see that and experience all of that. I've worked with companies that do the linens for restaurants and wash the napkins and been on their floor and asked, gosh, how do you get wine stains out of a tablecloth? And so that the journalist in me is always learning and always, I find there is no such thing as a dull person. There is no such thing as a dull job. There are only dull questions. So the chance to get out and meet people and learn about industries that you never even knew existed, or if you did know they exist, you never thought you'd have any contact with them, to be able to bring my message of considerate communication and being the best version of yourself to all these different professionals all around the country and around the globe. I love it. I love it so much.
That is so cool. Yeah, I that is exciting. And I love, to hear the point about like these TV appearances don't necessarily get paid. You got to they create a way for you to make your own path, which is, like you said, one of the things I'm super excited and want to share with people on this podcast. And I would love to hear, a little bit more about, these courses and these speaking engagements was it a lot of word of mouth? Were you like going on forums? Like for someone listening that's like, whoa, I can do that. I have a specialty area. I can sell to people. How did you find some of these opportunities?
Sure. So one of the things that I did at the outset was I realized I had a bunch of friends, and I wish I'd known you at the time, Ikey, because I would have definitely looped you into this group. I created a group called the Experts Collective. And this group was, I would be in a green room at a TV show, and I would meet the different version of me who did something entirely different, but had a similar path. So my friend Andrea Surtash, for example, who was one of the most foremost and is one of the most foremost experts on dating and relationships. She and I kind of bonded and just talking, and we realized, gosh, we've got these burgeoning careers where you could be on CNN one day and, quite candidly, the next day as you're kind of still building, thinking, should I just take a job at Banana Republic? I just go back to the corporate world, or should I go back to the sinking ship of magazines? So you have the benefits and you have the vacation pay and all that. There's an allure of that. And, there are some days when, again, early on, if things were a little bit slower, you'd really start to question yourself. And having people who understood that completely, because they were doing the same thing. They were like that swan, gliding along the surface of the water, but furiously paddling underneath.
Yep, underneath.
Right. Unbeknownst to everyone looking, all they could see is the beautiful swan. You're on TV, you'd think, wow, this guy's made it. He is set, he's ready to go. And yet business-wise, there were still challenges. So realizing that it was hard to get other people who would understand that experience unless they were doing a very similar thing in their lives, I formed this group, the Experts Collective. And so we had the travel expert, and we had the organization expert, and the dating expert, and the fitness expert. And we were kind of all of us together. It's almost like the Hall of Justice or the Justice League.
Yes.
Like from DC Comics.
Love the connection to superhero themes.
Yeah. Exactly. And we really, it did not happen. And I'm so sad, maybe someday it will, but we really, we envisioned that one day we would do kind of like, and it was just such a mixed group of people, but it'd be like a Queer Eye for the Straight Guy kind of concept, except it would be, all of us would swoop in, and whenever, say it was a family where the mom needed career counseling, the kids had terrible manners, the dad was really poorly organized. They wanted to take a vacation. The teenage son had dating problems. We'd all kind of swoop in and just fix everything that this family had that was not working as well as it could. That did not happen. But what did happen was the sharing of common interests, of goals, the brains. We would meet once a month, and we would just talk, and we would talk about our business challenges. We'd talk about what was going on. And that cementing of connections is really, there were several members of the group who said, Thomas, I really think you need to be out there doing workshops, doing keynotes. Why are you not doing this? And they very generously, because none of it was competitive. We all worked in such separate verticals. None of it was competitive. They started sharing contacts with me. I started sharing contacts with them, and it just built from there.
That is so cool. Two things. One, I would watch that show. So if and when it happens, like, sign me up. I'm fan number one.
Great.
But two, I think what you just touched on, I usually like to ask people how their career has like affected their friendships or their mental health or like the people around them. And it sounds like, and please elaborate if there's more, but it sounds like you have used it to cultivate even better relationships with people that are doing similar things to you.
Yes. And, that's not something that I typically am asked about a lot, but it's such a great point and such a great question. I find we talked about you being so cool, and that's probably the reason why you're surrounded by so many cool people. I think for me, I am very entrepreneurial and I'm very creative, and I've had to reinvent myself, as we've discussed during this conversation. Mm-hmm. I find that I really gravitate most strongly to, whether it's friendships, whether it's romantic partnerships, whether it's business alliances, to people who are also really creative and dynamic and self-starting entrepreneurs. If I were to catalog my closest friends, and I do have some friends who are lawyers and they work for a law firm or they work for a bank, and that's their thing, and that's great. But I sometimes struggle to really connect with them on a deeper level in the way that I can with people who have that same entrepreneurial fire and that creative spark and the ability to reinvent.
Yeah, no, that's really, I think it's super important. That's something I'm working on too, is like getting people. I have lots of friends in different areas and things like that, but not as many that do like content creation or like things like that. So that was one of the reasons I was like, oh, this podcast is going to be great because I'll make friends. I'll get to connect with friends and like start to build out that collective of people, that Justice League of superheroes, if you will. All right. I have two more questions for you. The way we like to end the podcast is, the first question is, we live in a world that is, we're going through it in a lot of different ways. And I feel like there's not usually a great opportunity for people to brag about themselves or the things they're working on or just something exciting. So I want to give you some space to talk about maybe something you're hyped about, something that's coming up, something that's happened in the past. You've already talked about a lot of cool experiences. So if you have another one you want to share, I'd love to hear it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mentioned it briefly, and it's still, although it's about a year in, it's still in its nascent stage, but I'm doing a regular column for NBC Today. The column is called Mealtime with Mr. Manners. And what's been super fun
about name, the branding on par. Well, yet again.
Well, that's key. And I actually have my editor, I can't even take credit for coming up with the name of the column. It was her suggestion, and I love it. We have been tackling such seemingly arcane topics in the column, but they resonate like you would not believe. Like the column I'm working on this week, which will be long since published by the time this podcast airs, is on how long you should wait before ordering once you've sat down in a restaurant. Like, how long is too long? And when is a server being annoying? It's they keep coming over, are we ready? Do you have any questions? Can I take your order? And you literally sat down 24 seconds ago. Or you sat down 24 minutes ago and you said, oh, we haven't even looked,
Yeah.
So anyway, so some really kind of fun, quirky topics. We did one on, if you're in a restaurant, should you stack your plates as a courtesy to the server who's trying to clear the table for you? So, I've never been a server. I've never worked in a restaurant. So for that one, I interviewed servers and I got their input.
Yeah.
What do you like? Do you like patrons to do this? Do you not? Their answer was no. We appreciate the gesture, but leave the stacking to us.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's good to know.
Yeah, for me too. So the column has been super fun. And I'm just, when you ask about like what's next, I'm looking forward to seeing where that can build. So I've got multiple ideas for some documentaries based around, I'd love to partner, anyone, love to partner with Netflix on a doc, because I think the fact that we're talking about these issues now, and everywhere I go, I hear people just fascinated and having these questions. I know the interest is out there. So that hopefully if we're talking again in a year's time, or maybe even 6 months time, we can talk a little bit about my documentary.
Yeah, I've had this thought with a couple of guests for this first season. I'm like, I definitely need to have like a first season like catch up in like a year or two or whatever, and just to see where people are at. And ideally, when we do that, because I'm saying we're going to do it now, we'll be talking about your documentary, which would be really cool.
Fantastic, and you'll be invited to the opening premiere.
All right, I'm in. We'll watch that, and then we'll have another screening for the other show when you have that going.
Yes.
Okay, so our last thing, I like to do this because I love this. I would love this to be a very actionable podcast. I hope people are inspired by hearing your story, hearing what you do. But if you could give the listeners 3 tips, they could be long, they could be short. If they heard what you're doing, the cool stuff you have going on, and they want to kind of go down that path, or just you're curious about it, what would you tell them?
Sure. So I would say, for starters, my number one question that I used to ask when I was a little kid, and I would drive my siblings, I have 2 brothers and a sister, I drive my siblings crazy, was the question, what if? I would always, be in a situation, what if such and such? And they'd look at me and they would say, that would never happen. That can't happen. That's impossible. And so I really believe firmly in the power of asking what if. Even if the rest of the world around you thinks that what you're talking about is preposterous and impossible, it doesn't have to be. And if you've got the drive and the interest, you can make it happen. So I love being able to ask what if, just if only in your own mind, to explore alternative scenarios. I think it's a great philosophy to have. So what if is my guiding philosophy. I would say, and this kind of tags in nicely with what if. So my second piece of advice would be, think long and clear before you ever say no to an opportunity that's offered your way. And I can point to so many times in my career where, for a variety of reasons, I was too overscheduled. The money was just ridiculously insulting. And for whatever reason, I decided to say yes to the invitation, whether it was a part-time gig or an assignment, or frankly, even just a party, a networking reception where you were feeling exhausted, and somebody spontaneously said, hey, we're having this, would you want to come? Kind of tempted to say no. I think the power of being able to say yes, even when you're not entirely feeling it, I think so many times it's those specific occasions when we've said yes, when we were tempted to say no, where we actually find the best results. And the last one, I believe, is, and I shared it earlier, is that I don't believe there is such a thing as a dull person. I think it's really easy to just size people up by how they look or how they talk, or just think that they are either going to be uninteresting, or, if you're looking to network, of zero value to you. And for that reason, look, we live in an ADD, always on, hyper rushed culture. It's easy to just pass these people by because we just think that they really are of no value to us. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think sometimes the people who you would very easily disregard are the ones that you'd most likely forge a really fascinating connection with or learn something from. And in fact, so if we have time, I have a little small example of that one, which I think is kind of fun,
please,
and interesting. So I was having some work done on my apartment over the summer, and one of the workers was just very quiet, and these people are coming into your home every day. You want to offer them water and snacks and just try to engage them in some sort of conversation. Little by little, he started opening up, and one day, out of the blue, he says to me, so I'm thinking, like, my dream is I want to buy a house in London and do this. And I'm thinking, well, like, good for this guy. He's really ambitious. Hard to do that working as like a construction assistant, but okay. And I said, oh, how many years do you think you'll need to continue working to be able to achieve that dream? And he's like, oh, I can do it already. I said, wow, that's great. Congrats. He said, yeah. He said, Tickle Me Elmo? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, well, I was the Tickle Me Elmo boy. And I said, what do you mean? And so the Tickle Me Elmo, which of course was like the hot Christmas gift of, I don't know what year it was, 1993 or 1994.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had one when I was a kid.
Okay, yeah. So every child across America wanted Tickle Me Elmo, and no store shelves had them. He was the boy on the box, it's like holding Tickle Me Elmo, and I think the caption from Elmo was like, that tickles. But this little child model from 30 years ago was financially set, but more important and good for him. But more important than that was what resulted was this completely unexpected conversation of someone, again, I could have just easily skipped over that conversation and just thought, I need to go on to more important things than speaking to somebody who is a contractor's assistant. But I didn't, and that's not who I am. And just learn this really fascinating tidbit about someone that I would not have learned had I not been open to. So never thinking that anyone in your midst is dull, and being willing to engage with them and listen.
I love that. And I mean, if you aren't inspired before, after hearing these 3 tips, I feel like you have to be. I know I am. This has been such a great conversation, Thomas. I really appreciate you taking the time and hopping on here and sharing your story. And hopefully those listening got as much out of it as I did.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Mr. Manners, I appreciate your time. We'll have to get together soon. And again, thanks for being on the podcast.
Anytime. Thank you, Ikey.
Thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of The Pursuit of Creativity. If you enjoyed Thomas's story and got some value from it, be sure to leave a rating or review. As usual, check out Believe Divergent for any updates, BelieveDivergent.com, and the Believe Divergent Instagram. Once again, I'm your host, Ikey Ajavon. Thanks again for watching. We really appreciate you. And as usual, stay optimistic. Better days are coming.